Firstly, I want to thank everyone for your participation, especially during this time of uncertainty and disruption. We hope that you and your families are staying healthy and safe. And our workshop today focuses on planning for spring gardening. While the timeline for getting back to schools remains uncertain, we believe that gardening, whether it's in a small pot in your apartment or in a home garden or school learning garden, is so important for our health and the health of our communities, especially while navigating a public health crisis like we are today. So a big thank you for participating and coming to learn more about gardening. For those of you who are new to Big Green, we're a national nonprofit that works to connect kids to real food through a nationwide network of learning gardens and food literacy programs. We're in 200 schools across the city of Chicago. So this is our wonderful team. Although we can't be with you in person, we thought that we would share some photos of our team. And I just want to highlight that we have a wonderful new member on our team, Elisa. She's a garden educator, and she comes from a background of farming and extensive background in education. We're really excited to have her on board. So Marla, Catherine, and I will be the facilitators of this workshop, and those are the voices that you'll hear from today. Diving into the agenda. So we've gone through our welcome, we've gone through the necessary technical challenges that all new webinars face. Thank you again for bearing with us. And now we're going to enter into preparing the garden for the spring. We'll go over our garden plan. We'll go through a garden mapping and planning activity. We'll talk about growing groceries at home and demo some at-home activities that you can do with your families or just to help supplement groceries at home. We'll go through a tasting activity, and then we'll go through any wrap-up and questions. This webinar is being recorded, so if you have to step out at any point, we'll send out a recording of the webinar in an email and a blog post, and you can feel free to share this with anyone who you think might enjoy it as well. Okay, so we want to make this webinar fun and interactive. We have a little icebreaker to start off with. And at Big Green, we've been thinking a lot about comfort and how to seek comfort in these uncertain and tumultuous times. And food is a great way to do so. So we would like to hear from you in the chat box. Will you please type out your go-to comfort food? So mine today, mac and cheese, sounds so comforting. I would type that into the chat box, and we can see the different kinds of comfort foods that are coming in. And I'm going to launch a poll to test out our polling function. So you'll see on your screen that a poll will come up to kind of define the category that your comfort food is in. I'm going to give us 10 seconds to complete this poll, and then I'll launch it so that you can see the results. Also, I want to take this moment to just say, if you used the link in the first email that I sent out this morning, your name might be my name, Ilana Murder Epstein. You can change that in your settings at the bottom of your screen. It's okay if you don't change it. We've just got a lot of Ilanas on the line. All right, so I'm going to end this poll and share the results. So I see that there is mainly a combination of flavors. We've got some sweet folks coming in second. It's fun. Okay. So now stepping into our garden plan, each spring we plant greens that can grow fairly quickly, that can be tolerant to the colder temperatures. We're going to go into more detail about this garden plan. And we also provide garden plans for the summer and fall seasons. So today we're focusing on spring. And the first thing that we want to do when preparing for our spring is prepare the soil. So what that looks like is if you've had any weeds or any plant material that stayed in your garden through the winter, you'll want to pull those weeds and turn them into the soil. That plant debris just adds more organic matter into the soil, and it breaks down and it holds nutrients and it holds water. So every workshop, this is also a good time to add fertilizer and nutrients to your soil. Every workshop, usually in person, we distribute fertilizer, sustained fertilizer, which is a slow release fertilizer, meaning it gives nutrients to the soil throughout the growing season. Because we are uncertain on the timeline of being back in schools, we're still developing a strategy to distribute those fertilizer bags. Again, once we have more information, we'll be in touch about that resource. So what I like to do with my fertilizer, if you have fertilizer at home and are thinking about putting it in your garden, I like to add it before I even turn in the weeds, so that when I mix those weeds in, I'm also mixing in the nutrients of the fertilizer. Then lastly, just take time to flatten your seed bed, so making sure the soil is nice and smooth and ready for planting. So I'm going to hand it off to Catherine now, who's going to walk us through the spring garden plan.
All right, so for those of you who are familiar, Big Green every season provides a sample garden plan for what can be planted in Chicago at this time of year. So of course we've used the Learning Garden layout, but we're not in school right now. So I do want to bring your attention to the fact that these crops can be planted if you have a little bit of soil at home or a pot. We'll be talking a little bit later about doing some seed starting in a home environment. But just so that you're familiar with what can grow in our environment in the springtime, we've got this sample layout. So things like lettuce, pea shoots, arugula, spinach, radishes, and turnips are all really great spring crops. They love the cool weather, they grow really quickly, and a really great thing about them is that you can seed them directly. So you don't need to worry about seedlings or that kind of thing. You can just start the seeds directly into some soil. A lot of these crops are actually called cut and come again. So you can harvest them multiple times, which is a really great thing about greens. I will note that for the spring, when we say pea shoots, those would be peas that you plant and then harvest in their immature stage. So as like a tiny shoot, the first growth. But then if you leave those to keep growing through the summer, they will produce full pea pods. And then I also want to note that in your learning garden, you may have planted some garlic in the fall. If you had planted it, it would have been around November. That will start coming up around this time of year. You just want to leave it. That's actually not harvested until July when it's mature. And then perennial herbs, when we say that phrase, that means the herbs that are going to come back every year. The ones that we provided last year, if you were with us, were sage, chives, thyme, oregano, rosemary, and lavender. So those may still be in your learning garden coming back. So we just reserve some space in our plan for that. And then the last thing I want to bring your attention to on our spring garden plan is under the climate and season box. The last average frost date is May 15th, but all of these plants that are listed here, you don't need to wait to the last frost. They're actually cold tolerant enough to be able to be planted now, even if there's a little snow, even if it's still a little frosty, they're totally able to handle that. So if you've planted in the fall or spring with us before, you're familiar that we use 2 different planting methods. So broadcast seeding, which is the sprinkle, tickle, pat, which you can do with spinach, arugula, and peas. Just note that peas need that extra little poke to go a little bit deeper down. The other form of planting for these seeds would be to use like a seed spacer or some sort of measuring out or a finger to do 2 inches between each seed. And the only thing you're going to want to do that with is radishes and turnips, because they're going to need enough space to grow width-wise. We also did recommend since we have a few different kinds of lettuce varieties, to actually broadcast them into rows. So doing bands of lettuce, it makes it a little bit easier to harvest the different kinds and save a little bit of your seeds. And then, yeah, as far as planting dates go, we are good to go planting for the spring. And you can plant these things anytime until mid-May. So if you have a little soil at home, I encourage you to try out a couple seeds. Of course, like, we're not at school right now, so we won't be planting at schools right now, but it is the spring season officially. And then watering, as we know, is fundamental to the success of any garden or plants. Particularly the first 10 days to 2 weeks, the seeds really need to stay moist so that they can properly germinate. And then even when they're young seedlings, they're really tender and they dry out quickly. So it's important that they stay consistently wet. So we have on our website a few different watering options. You may have seen us do upcycled watering cans. So that's using a milk jug or a water bottle or a milk carton to have students actually make their own watering cans. That can be a really good at-home craft as well. And that's really good for younger students who may not be able to carry the weight of a traditional watering can. If we've done an event at your school, we've likely done the little rain clouds activity, which is having students use a cup of water. You can always top water with a hose. And then we also have the irrigation system in many of our gardens. Although, just a note about that, when you're watering new seeds, that irrigation might actually lay below the depth that you're planting the seeds. So it may not be actually watering those seeds. So it's always good to top water, at first when you plant seeds, just to make sure they're getting that water. And then as far as checking to see if you need to water, you can always do the finger test, which is just to put your finger into the soil. And if it comes out wet, then your soil is wet enough. If it's dry, it probably needs a little bit of water. And yeah, of course, if it rains or something like that, then you probably don't need to water. And then, yeah, just another note about watering: once you do start to see leaves and seedlings develop, we always want to be sure that we're watering the roots of that plant and not the leaves or the stem, because the roots are where they're going to take up their water. And then a final note: I know everything's up in the air right now, but we do want to make a plug for the practice of tracking harvests. So it can be good to measure your harvest from year to year, season to season, see how things are changing. Again, things like lettuce and spinach and pea shoots and arugula, even you can harvest and harvest again multiple times. Tracking your harvest is just a really good practice as a gardener to understand how much your garden produces. As far as in the context of the school community, we do have an online link to track harvest from Learning Gardens, and we share out, if you submit data to us, then we'll share out a report about how much that produce was valued at, how much you grew, how many serving sizes, and we can make that into a report that you can share with your school community, which can be a great way to just celebrate together, your accomplishments as a team.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Catherine. So this is a time during this webinar where we're going to take a moment to answer some questions that have been asked previously. So if you do have any questions that you haven't typed into the chat box yet, please go ahead and do that. We're going to take about 5 minutes to just review some that have been asked so far. So we got a question: what happens if we don't go back to school? That is a great question. We also do not have the answer of what that timeline looks like right now. We're just taking it day by day, week by week. So when school does go back into session, we will be in touch with you all about what gardening looks like at your school at that time, and we will definitely have the resources available to you. In the meantime, feel free to use any of the things that we're sharing at your own home or with your own families. Share it with your student families as well. So what does turn in seeds mean? I think that question was, I think Alana said turn in the weeds in the garden. So you're not turning in the seeds, but to add more mulch, more fertilizer to your garden, you are turning in the weeds. There was a question about garlic. So they had extra garlic that they planted in several beds. And then which of our spring garden crops can be grown around the garlic? So all the plants that are part of your spring garden plan can be grown around the garlic, because we generally ask that you, or suggest that you plant your garlic down the middle of a garden bed, so you have those edges to do some planting. And you just want to make sure to give about 4 to 6 inches around the garlic to give it space to grow, and those other seeds that you're planting a space to grow as well. One school had a ton of peas grow and they let them go to seed. Will they grow again on their own? So some might regrow, and saving those seeds from those peas and replanting them from yourself at a more appropriate temperature and a more appropriate time during the season might be more effective in getting those peas to germinate and grow again. But yeah, they'll reseed themselves too, which is always a fun surprise. I'm just gonna check the chat. So when is a good time to plant those sweet potato slips? So that's a summertime crop. If we have planting that happens in the summer, we'll see what the timeline is with how things are right now, but we'll be providing those slips, and that's a summertime planting. So late May, early June. The herbs that you might find in your perennial herb garden include chives, sage, rosemary, lavender, thyme, and oregano. And Catherine has typed that into the chat box. And then the final question we're going to do, if more questions have been put into the chat after this one, I'm going to copy them over to a document and we will answer them later, but we're going to answer this final one and then we'll move on with the workshop. So are we going to have a statement about working together in the garden in the spring, or working alone due to COVID-19? We are following CPS protocols and guidelines right now. So those are that is the statement that we are following. And we haven't put out anything different than that. So I'd say, yeah, follow safety protocols and social distancing in that regard. Awesome. So we are now going to move on to talking about a garden mapping activity that we've created to share with you all. So we want you to feel confident and capable in your learning gardens, no matter what your gardening experience is. So this activity is a new one that we have developed to help support you in planning and implementing a successful planting day by creating a planting plan, a planting map based off of your school's learning garden design. So this activity can be done in preparation for any growing season, not just the spring. And so in this next section of the workshop, we're gonna just give an overview of this activity and go through the materials that'll be available to you through this activity. So the goals of the garden mapping activity are to help you prepare for your upcoming growing season and your planting day by designing, constructing, and labeling a learning garden map with seasonally relevant crops based on Big Green's seasonal garden plan, as well as reviewing planting methods and techniques for the specific crops that you'll be planting on your planting day. So like I said, we'll review those specific materials for completing this activity in the next few slides, but I just want to highlight The images shown on this slide are of the finished product of the garden mapping activity as done at Camas Elementary last fall. So a class of 5th grade students reviewed the seasonal garden plan, and we discussed what crops they wanted to plant where, and then they constructed an enlarged map of their learning garden that was then hung up in a visible place on the school grounds so that everyone could see what was growing in the learning garden. If you're interested in doing this activity at your school or in your own home, these are the resources that will be provided to you from Big Green. So we have a lesson plan that details the whole activity with talking points and directions and how and when to utilize all of the materials. The garden bed templates A, B, and C are used to create the large finished product learning garden map that's labeled with all of the crops. The seasonal garden plan, as you all might be familiar, walks you through the different types of crops that you'll be planting and can be referenced for questions on seasonality and planting and harvest dates. The how-to planting guides demonstrate different planting processes like broadcasting or direct seeding, and there's images and words that walk you through those different steps. And the learning garden education layout is used for planning out what crops are going to be planted in each bed before you use those garden bed templates to create the larger version of your learning garden. And these are all the materials that as a school or as someone doing this activity on your own, you would be providing. And just make note that those seeds were provided to you at our back to school workshop last August. And if you're needing more seeds, different seeds, just let your garden educator know and we will make sure to get you connected. And if you don't have access to those seeds right now because school is closed, that's okay too. We're just taking it one day at a time. But yeah, make note of those are the materials that we'd be asking you to provide if you're doing this activity with students. So here are some pictures of students at Leland Elementary who did the garden mapping activity this past spring. And this, they kind of did it in a different way. So it was multiple classrooms involved in the activity in a scaffolded fashion. So it wasn't just one class doing the whole thing. Students of, I think, grades like 1 through 4 discussed which crops they wanted to grow in each bed, drew out the plan using the education layout, and then used the bed templates to draw those specific crops before cutting out and pasting those templates onto the final poster board. So there's lots of different ways you can envision doing this activity with multiple classrooms of students as well. And another fun thing that this group of students or this school did was they envisioned things that they wanted to grow that might not have been part of the Big Green Garden Plan, but crops that they were interested and excited about growing. And this is a great opportunity to explore those options as well. So other considerations you can make when doing this activity include who will be involved and how you might align it to learning standards. So the possibilities are really endless. Do you want to do multiple classrooms? Is this an activity you want to do with adults, teachers, or parents? Any other way you might want to do it? The activity is also very adaptable for planning for a non-learning garden as well. So yeah, think about how you might be able to do something like this in your own home. You could do something like keep a garden journal. So a long-term garden journal, you can develop it over multiple years. You can draw out your garden plot and decide where you want to plant each thing seasonally so that you can keep a record of what is planted where. And you can also think about, how well it did, if you want to use a different variety, anything like that. And there are also digital ways to manage something like a garden journal or a garden map as well. If Excel or Google Sheets excites you, we have a garden log document in Excel that we're going to be sharing out in our follow-up resources that is basically the concept of a garden journal, but digitized, and it's really cool. So this activity, this concept is not just relegated to a big green learning garden. It's definitely something that you can encourage anybody with any type of growing space to do as well. Awesome.
Okay. Thank you, Marla. We're going to take another moment and pause for folks to chat any questions in and review that chat box. Great. Marla, if you see any questions, will you field those? We'll take another minute or so another few minutes to address those questions.
It looks like we don't have too many new questions, but just something we want to reiterate is that while we're under the shelter-in-place guidelines, that we're not recommending that anyone use their learning gardens, and we're just following the guidelines put in place by the city. So that's definitely what we are working on complying with right now too.
Great.
And then, love the excitement about the garden journal. It's definitely a great activity. We got 2 new questions really quickly, and then we'll move on. Could we explore activities our families might be able to do at home? Yes, we have resources that we have right now and that we're continuing to build out that we'll share with you, not only in this follow-up email, but in subsequent weeks as well. We got a question of, can you mail seeds to students for a project? I don't see anything wrong with that. That sounds really cool. I guess following sanitizing protocol is important there, but I think mail is a really great thing to receive in a social distancing time. So that sounds really fun. Great. Thanks, Alana. Back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Marla. So now, following up with that question on if we will be doing any activities you can do at home with your families, I am going to share my screen, and I'm actually going to demo some activities that I have done to share with you all. So this is a time where we are in our homes. You might have kids who are excited about gardening or might be interested in learning about seeds. And so I've created some activities to show you all that use materials that you might have in your house or in your pantry for growing and doing some gardening. So although we might not realize it, a lot of the things that we buy at the grocery store and eat in our diet are seeds, in fact, seeds. And so I have a can of black beans, I have some lentils, and I found some pumpkin seeds in my pantry. And these are all things that you can actually plant and grow. So these are the pumpkin seeds. I'm soaking them in some water. And the thing that we don't know about grocery store seeds is how old they are. So before planting anything from the grocery store, like black beans or lentils, I first do a germination test, which is another really fun activity to do with kids or students. And what I have done is I have moistened a paper towel, and I just put that wet paper towel in a plastic bag. I took 10 black bean seeds and I set them inside the moist paper towel and put it in a place that's warm for these seeds to then start to sprout and grow. So out of the 10 seeds, I want to know how many are starting to germinate and grow. And I set these aside just yesterday. And I'm going to show you my desktop. So this is the paper towel. You can see the seed coat is already changing the color of the paper towel. It's a little bit more brown because those seeds have been in the moist water paper towel. And in fact, we have many of these little seeds have already started to germinate and grow. So I know that these black bean seeds are viable, meaning that they're alive, they were stored well, they're not too old, and they are actually able to sprout. So this is very exciting. And now what I'm going to do is actually plant the seeds that have already started to germinate. I have a recycled container. This is a mushroom container. And I've been collecting tea bags and coffee grounds. So if you don't have soil on hand at home, there are some creative options that you can use to still grow plants. So these are coffee grounds, and I'm just going to set the germinated seeds in the moist coffee grounds. And like Catherine mentioned when talking about watering, it's just important that these seeds stay moist while they're germinating. They don't need sunlight, but once they sprout and start to grow, you will want to put this container in a sunny spot so that they have light to grow. So I'm going to put them in my windowsill. And yes, this little tea bag here, I just cut off the top and am placing seeds inside the tea bag. So it's a fun way to get creative with little ones in the house. And then once these plants start to grow and start to form little seedlings, like develop into seedlings, I have a spot outside in my home garden that I'm going to plant them in. If you don't have a space outside, there are seeds that can that are good for just eating as sprouts. So for example, my lentils here, what I'm doing is I'm just sprouting these so that they form little sprouts, and then I can add them to my salads. They're actually edible just in that form. So with sprouting seeds, I make sure that the seeds are moist, and I actually run water through them each day and drain out the water and keep them in a sunny place. We're going to follow up with lots of resources of at-home activities so that you all can get an idea as well. And then quickly, I just want to show you one of my propagation activities that I have been doing at home. This is a few green onion plants that I planted. So what I did is I just snipped off the tops of the green onions and I planted the white part. And this one has really launched off. It's only a week old and it's like been growing. So what I can do now is cut this and it'll come again. So again, kind of like what Catherine said about those salad greens, those lettuce greens, they're cut and come again crops. So this I'm just gonna add to my spring rolls and they'll keep growing. So these are some ideas for you all to get creative at home and still enjoy in the beauty of green and growing things in your house. So again, in the PowerPoint that we're going to share, I created slides that outline exactly these activities that I just walked you through. So you can see those on our PowerPoint, and we'll send, again, follow-up resources in a blog post and email. I'm now going to share my screen again, and we're going to finish the last part of our workshop, which is on a tasting activity. So bear with me while I share my screen. And so this is the slide deck with the activities that we just walked through. And before we jump into our tasting and eating activity, I have another question for you all, a poll question. And that question is, when you follow a recipe, do you follow the recipe exactly, or do you adjust it as you go? So you'll see a poll. If I can get it to launch. So you'll see this poll. And I think that this is a fun question because I have family members who never use a recipe. And some family members who exactly follow the recipe to a T. I don't see anyone populating the poll. Marla, will you unmute and just confirm that you see it? Oh, you don't see it.
Yeah, it hasn't popped up yet.
Okay. I'll try it one more time, and if not, we will move on. Relaunch poll 2, continue. Do you see it now?
There it is.
Great. So I'm gonna give us 10 seconds to complete this poll. All right, and I'm ending the poll, and I will share the results. Marla, do you see those results on your screen?
Yes, almost half only use the recipe as a guideline.
Yes, just a structure to be creative with. So we're gonna talk more about getting creative in the kitchen. I'm gonna hand this off to Catherine so she can walk you through our next session.
All right. So today we're actually going to be talking about a recipe and spicing it up, but a recipe that relies on canned veggies and beans, but that you can definitely add fresh produce to. So I will say, y'all know that we are huge fans of fresh, local, school-grown produce, but we did want to be a little bit responsive to the times, plus recognizing that we live in Chicago and that especially in the early spring or in the winter, we don't really have access to fresh fruits and vegetables that are grown in other parts of the world at particular times of the year. So we're going to be featuring a recipe today about, it's a zucchini, corn, and black bean salad. And while we talk through this recipe, I just want you to take note. I love that a lot of y'all like to spice up your recipes. So I want you to think through how you might adjust this recipe, particularly using some of that spring produce we mentioned.
So is any of this stuff?
Okay, cool. I'm back. So adding spring produce like the pea shoots, arugula, lettuce, radishes, turnips, and spinach. I saw someone added in the chat box that they made guacamole with their students and added cilantro and radishes they planted. I love that. So yeah, just thinking through how we can add to recipes using learning garden produce or using seasonal produce. Note any substitutions that can be made. And then also, we're not in school right now, but in the future, if you did want to take on some classroom cooking, thinking through how this recipe in particular might work for a classroom environment. So I'm going to just show you the recipe and give you a minute to read through it. So a few things to note about this recipe. Some of the items are noted that you could use canned or frozen produce, which is really great. Um, as far as the optional ingredients, those may be things that you have around, or you may just want to omit them altogether. As far as preparing this recipe, if you were to do it with a school or a classroom, the main thing we'd want to do for prep is just sauteing and chopping that zucchini up. But all the rest of the steps, beyond the chopping, of course, depending on the age of your students, all the measuring and mixing would be great to do with students, as well as having them taste the recipe and then decide if they want to add those optional ingredients. That's a really good practice for classroom cooking. And then, of course, at the bottom, we add any available greens or herbs from your learning garden. The one on here that we haven't really talked about yet, so pea shoots, lettuce, radishes, chives, would be green garlic. So again, green garlic is the very young garlic that you may have popping up in your home garden or in your school garden right now. And that actually is edible and is super delicious too. They have really tender leaves that you can actually taste and eat. It's kind of like the texture of a green onion, but it's garlic, so it's really delicious. But yeah, again, students can do the mixing, they can rip up herbs with their hands. All these things are really great for student participation. So why are we talking about using canned or frozen produce? So there's a lot of benefits actually to using this type of food. One thing is that it's cost effective, especially out of season. Another thing is that the produce has actually been harvested at its peak ripeness. So contrary to like some people believe that there's actually a decrease in nutrients from canned or frozen produce, but actually because it's been harvested at its ideal ripeness, it retains a lot of those nutrients because it's essentially harvested right away and then preserved. It's a great way to enjoy fruits and veggies out of season, or enjoy those tropical fruits that we love, even though we live in the Midwest. A really big one, especially when thinking about classroom cooking, is the decreased prep time. So produce that you get in a can or frozen is often peeled and pre-chopped. So two really good examples of that would be, first of all, pumpkin. So thinking about a big pumpkin that you would get fresh and how much time it takes to process that. So cutting it open, which is hard, removing the seeds, getting rid of the outside peel and everything. That takes a long time. It's a really fun activity when you're up for it. But canned pumpkin is equally as delicious and functions the same in most recipes. Another great example of the decreased prep time, one that I love to eat, is mango. And I really don't like chopping the mango and taking out the pit and peeling it. But frozen mango is a really great option and has decreased prep time exponentially, for me at least. And then another one to think about is the actual food waste that you're having to handle from your end. So when it's prepped and processed, from the distributor, they're managing all that food waste. Whereas again, with the pumpkin, if you're doing that at home, you might have to either, if you're lucky enough to have compost all of that excess, or otherwise just throw it in the garbage. So again, yeah, think of ways you can dress up recipes using canned or frozen produce where you're not going to notice that textural difference. So things like adding things to it, adding fresh crisp greens or herbs, adding chopped veggies to crisp everything up, or just using recipes that you don't really notice the difference. So things like smoothies, dips, and spreads, and slaws. And again, this can just really increase the convenience of cooking, especially in a classroom environment. So some of the best canned options are, of course, beans, we all know and love. Corn, pumpkins, and tomatoes are a really good one to get canned. And then, yeah, just a note about the tomatoes. They actually have more lycopene when they're canned, so they have more of the antioxidant that tomatoes are known for. And that's because the canning process, they need to heat the tomatoes. So canned tomatoes actually have more lycopene than fresh tomatoes, which is interesting. Just a few things to look out for, especially if you're going to buy canned fruit. So the can on the left is packed in 100% juice, and the can on the right in tiny print tells you that it actually has a heavy syrup. So anytime a company is advertising that it's in a syrup, that means that fruit is going to have a lot of added sugar. So if you are looking to avoid that added sugar, just make sure you look for ones that are in that are packed in 100% juice. Another thing to look out for, especially with our veggies, is the excess salt. So I'll talk a little bit on the next slide about what to look out for in the labeling for salt. But if you do have something with salt, you can rinse it. Just note that rinsing sometimes takes away some of the vitamins that have leached into the water, but otherwise rinsing and soaking are totally good to get rid of some of that excess salt. And then you also just want to note, again, the texture changes that might happen through the canning process. So here's my little slide about salt and sodium. So sodium is an essential nutrient for our body. It's one that we all need, but due to the American diet, most of us usually get plenty of sodium. It's something we get in abundance. So for many people, limiting sodium is a common goal. So I've listed here the actual recommended maximum daily intake, which is 2,300 milligrams per day. So it's not recommended that you get that much. It's recommended you get no more than that much. And so I have 3 different cans of green beans here. One has no salt, one is with salt, and one has low sodium. And just note the different amounts of sodium that means. So the one with salt actually has 300 milligrams of sodium, which is about 13% of your maximum daily intake. And that's for a half a cup serving. So again, sodium is essential for our diet, but sometimes you want to think about what when you're sacrificing flavor for sodium, when like an example of canned beans, you're getting a lot of sodium, but that's not actually adding a lot of flavor to your beans. So if you are looking to avoid sodium, you can always look for, or avoid excess sodium rather, you can always look for a label that says reduced salt, reduced sodium, or there are definitely cans available that have no salt added. And we'll of course add some follow-up resources with some more information about this as well. So we have about 8 minutes left in our presentation. So I encourage you, or I invite you, to add any last minute questions to the chat. We're gonna address those at the end. And any questions that we don't have time for, we'll share in a follow-up email the answers to. But we do wanna leave you with a little positive note. So we won't play this video right now. We have a little garden song to share with you. A little poem, and we just want to take this moment to say we're so grateful that you took the time to be with us today, to talk about gardening and cooking. Just seeing your faces on the video has been so nice and refreshing. It's been really great to have this little community today. And so yeah, we'll share this video with you. If in the slides you can play it, you can share it out if you want. We have this poem, The Little Plant, that you can read through, but I do want to take enough time to address the questions and also tell you a few updates, a few housekeeping updates. So first of all, again, we'll be sharing out this presentation. We're going to be recording. We have been recording this presentation. We'll share out the recording. You can share it with your team or anyone that you think might be interested. We've compiled a blog post that is live that has links to all the resources we've mentioned, as well as some extra videos from our repertoire. Importantly, we'll be sharing out a link to our survey. I know we give you guys a lot of surveys, but if you could please take 5 minutes to fill this one out, we'd really appreciate it. And feel free to add your comments about how you felt this virtual platform went. And if you like it, if you don't, we'd love to hear from you. And then I saw many questions kind of in relation to this, and I do want to acknowledge that for the first time ever, Big Green is putting together groups of resources for families. So we will soon be circulating a sign-up form that you can share with families to get those resources. We're also working, we have a few other exciting projects in the works during this time. One of those is a teacher-facing site that will host all of our Big Green resources for teachers. Some of those things include lessons, curriculum access, and some PDs. And then we'll also be starting a Big Green Educators Facebook group, again, to support collaboration and sharing of resources among educators. I've seen so many great ideas shared in the chat, and I know you all are bursting with creativity and great ideas. So we do want to foster that community and allow people to share with each other. And with that, I will give it to Marla to talk through some of the questions.
Thanks, Catherine. We have a few questions about sprouting, so lentils and also avocado seeds. So what is sprouting? And then specifically with the lentils that Alana was showcasing, how do you know when your lentils have sprouted? So you'll know when your lentils have sprouted when the seed has germinated and you can see the little white sprout coming out. And you can then eat those lentils immediately as sprouted lentils, or wait a few more days for the sprout to grow a little more, taste them then, and see which you prefer. So that is a suggestion from Elisa, who we mentioned earlier as our new program coordinator, garden educator on our team. And then sprouting avocado seeds, definitely you can set them up with toothpicks and a little cup of water, and the sprout will the seed will eventually germinate. It takes a little bit longer, but any types of experiments or tests or things you want to try out, leave no seed untested. Open up your pantry and just try to germinate everything. Let's see. Oh, we had a question about seed catalog suggestions. Catherine or Alana, do you guys have any go-to seed catalog suggestions? I know others on our team definitely do as well, and you could definitely drop those in the chat. But Alana and Catherine, if you just want to unmute and share any ideas you might have for a seed catalog.
I will share that we love and receive our seeds each year from Johnny's, and they have a really great seed catalog. Alana is a seed fanatic, so I'm sure she has some others to share as well.
Yeah, Johnny's is my go-to seed catalog. There are also some heirloom seed catalogs that are interesting to explore and see all of the different varieties. And those resources we can also follow up with. Yeah, Baker's Creek is a great one, the rare seeds. They also do donations to schools. So those are my two big ones, Baker's Creek and Johnny's.
Awesome, thank you. We have 2 minutes left. I guess the two questions that will, unless anybody wants to ask anything else in the chat, the two ones that we'll leave you with. So we were asked, will we get any, will you guys receive any composting or compost or spring supplies from us somewhere? Right now, we are following CPS protocol and social distancing protocols to, make sure that we're not violating anything there. So we do not have plans at the moment to set up a distribution site. And if that is something that is able to be done in the future, we will definitely let you know. And as for those supplies, as school reopens and things get back to normal, we will be in touch with how to get those supplies from us. And then our final question, if the school closure continues, can you go to the school or should you leave the garden alone? And if you do leave the garden alone, will it be okay? Again, we're suggesting follow CPS protocol, follow City of Chicago protocol. If you leave the garden alone, it will definitely be okay. There might be some extra weeds you have to pull out when you go back to plant again, but your garden is doing its thing. It's loving the weather now, and it'll be there and happy whenever we all get back to it. So awesome. We are at 11:30. So thank you everyone for participating. And we'll be following up with all the resources and we will be in touch. So look forward to connecting again.